Hello, welcome to Adobe Live. I'm Danielle Morimoto, and I'm a design manager here at Adobe. I work primarily on Creative Cloud, specifically on creation tools on the web. And today we are joined by Anu. Anu, welcome to Adobe Live.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We're so excited to have you here today. And Anu is going to be designing 3D illustrations in, I think today, Illustrator and Dimension, tomorrow probably in Photoshop as well. So we have you here for the next today and tomorrow, 9:30 Pacific time, which we're really excited about. And I'll let you jump into things soon. But before that, I do want to call out that we have an awesome lineup for this week and just want to go through what that content's going to be. So it is a week of women. And so in honor of Women's History Month and International Women's Day, we are bringing and featuring a whole lineup of women identifying artists, designers, photographers, and hosts. So I'm really excited to be part of this, and definitely check out all of the rest of the content this week from a full cast of women. So thank you all for joining. I want to make sure to just call out that if you want to make sure that you're engaging with us in the chat and everything like that, head on over to Behance and make sure to give us a little shout out as to where you're tuning in from and what's going on today for you, and any comments that you have during the process or what you're seeing from Anu, definitely engage with us there. And yeah, with that, Anu, go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone on the stream.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Anu. I am a graphic designer. I specialize in branding, packaging, typography, and 3D design. Right now, I am in Pratt doing my master's, and yeah, excited to be going live today. Going to be showing you some of my work. So this is my website. Primarily, I work with 3D a lot these days, and I do a bit of branding and packaging. So the project you see here to the left is the 36 Days of Type series that I worked on last year. Mainly, I did this using Dimension. And I just wanted to go for like a bold, fun vibe. And I kept that consistent throughout the series. And I did finish it. So that was like a great accomplishment for me.
Awesome. Totally. I mean, that's a lot of letters to go through and numbers and everything.
Yeah, like I know. Yeah. And I can quickly run through another one where this was a personal project done on Illustrator and Photoshop. This was for a frozen yogurt brand, and I did the identity, and I wanted the entire brand to be more type focused. So I kept that consistent again throughout the brand. And yeah, so some other work I do is 3D type, and I pick up, random codes, and I just do it during my personal time. Most of this is not what I do, as a professional job. And yeah, so that's a bit about me. And for today, I will be running through how I did my 36 days of type. And since today is the first day of the 2022 edition, so maybe, you guys can join me and make some letters in Dimension. And yeah, I can talk you through my experience about it. So I think we can get started with designing. Let me pull up my Illustrator. So I'm going to start first with designing the letter A. So what I do initially is just figure out the different parts of the letter. So more like type anatomy. So point out what the terminal is, the counter, the bowl, the stem, so that I have everything in place and I know what I can tweak and what I can't. So certain letters, I mean, you need some parts of the letter to be, like the characteristic of that letter is unique to it. So, it's not like you can change it too much. So that'll probably affect the readability of it. So yeah, so this is how I get started first, and I'm gonna start designing now.
As you're jumping in, there definitely are a couple questions in the chat. I'd be curious. I know that people were really excited to see some of your portfolio and some of the pieces that you worked on. I know Carol was wondering, what is the font that you did for Coco?
I used, I think, let me see. I think I'm just gonna write it down. I think it's called this one. It's called Le Murmur. It's a free font. I think it's Velveteen is the type foundry that you can find this font on.
Very cool. Yeah. Awesome.
So I can actually, since we're speaking about this, I can just get started with this font first. My first rough draft is what I generally do on Illustrator and see what shapes I can use for different parts of the letter. So let's say, for example, if I want to use, so if this is the terminal over here. So let's say I want it to be circular. I'm just going to change the color of this so that you can see. So let's say I want this to be circular. And then the stem can be maybe just a rectangle. And then you have the spur over here. So let's say extend it just below. Can you do another circle here? And then we need the counter. So since we're going with spheres, maybe why not, try many different sizes of spheres. One thing I would say is important is to have some sort of repetition when you're creating letters so that, there's something that brings the whole letter together. So now I think we have enough of this letter. So then, you decide how personally, I feel like this is not looking much like an A. So then you start increasing the characteristics of the letter. Let's say I want to do this. Yeah, then this could go bigger. This could go maybe slightly smaller. So this is like a rough exercise that I do before I actually get started, just to know the different kinds of forms that I can use. So let's say this is one of the forms, and I'm just going to continue designing more forms here. It can also be the capital letter. So let's try that. So one thing to remember when you design is keep experimenting with different sort of shapes, because I think that's the only way that I learned how to go about 36 days of type. And each curve that you add, let's say each shape that you add, instead of a bar here, for example, I'm gonna just delete that. So let's say instead of the circle, I just add a bar here. So things like this make a lot of difference. The more you start experimenting, the more you know that, okay, maybe I can do a circle here. I don't need to do this because this is like there in every, like that's the basic form of A. So, to try to do something different. And can try some
that's
more.
why it's so cool to have you on like the live stream to see into like your process and the way you think. So it's like seeing how you're starting with just a piece of text and typography, right? And like just looking at that letter and then really abstracting it out to like basic shapes and starting to play with the different forms in that way. And there's so much variety like with what you're starting to get here.
Yeah, I think I'm just gonna, keep trying to change this to see how much better it can get. And then like everybody, like you guys can probably understand more, how to go about this. So now, let's say I do a second circle, maybe a little bit smaller. So things like making it smaller and bigger really, really depends on the kind of eye, like visual eye that you have. It's not, everybody might not find this sort of spacing correct. So it's up to the designer to know what's working and what's not. And yeah, that's something you can take a call on your own. Just gonna space this equally. Okay, that's equal. So yeah, this is one of them. Then let's see if you want to make this even more interesting. Let's see what you can do. This is me just trying to figure it out like as I go about it. So you see what's happening here is that like the minute I put the bar, I feel like it's going closer to the actual A. So that is usually when I do 36 days, I try not to use like very, very specific, the bar or the stem of the A that we always see. So to take that off makes it much more unique.
That's interesting. So you're trying to find a balance between how much it actually looks very close to the letter form itself versus being like abstract and making sure it's still, you can tell it's still an A, but it is abstracted out.
Yeah. So maybe we can try a semicircle and see how that looks.
We do have a question in the chat for you. So Anika's wondering, have you ever made a working font, and like what was the process like if you have?
I have actually never made a working font. That's one of the things that I'm trying to work on. I think it's really, like for me, I think it's really, really hard to actually make a font. It takes a lot of time and dedication. So when I get the time, I think I will, that's something I really need to learn. It's been on my bucket list for a while. So yeah, definitely gonna attempt that soon.
Nice. I feel like it'd be awesome to see you have like a working type with some of these because you're so close. You have so many of the forms already. But I agree, there's so much more that goes into kind of getting a working type because you have to think about sort of the spacing between particular letters, and everything like that as well as they come together.
Yeah, I think keeping each letter consistent, that's one of the main things that it's pretty hard to do. Like my letters are so different from each other that I feel like bringing it all together will take quite a bit of time for me. So yeah, I think I will work on it sometime when I get the time to.
There you go. Ooh, I like this. This is cool.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna put all these in line so that you can see what you start with. Maybe this can be the start. And then you keep tweaking and tweaking, and then and you should also know when to stop. I think that's also really important. So you can you can go on tweaking and trying to make things better. But I think the good thing about 36 days is that you do it on the particular day. So then you just get one day to do it and you move on. So I think that way you just use, even if you don't like it, you just stop and you move on and you don't keep meddling around with it. So I think that's also a great, that sort of limitation is nice to have. And you really have to, just get it out there.
It's a great point. I feel like a lot of designers or just creatives in general, it's like that's a big question. It's just like, when do you know when to stop? Because a lot of times people just keep going forever, right? And it's like, you just keep iterating, or you're like, oh, but I could change this and it could look just like slightly different. So you've been showing us a little bit of your process too, of like how you're iterating and kind of going through this. There was a question from Wade in the chat wondering, do you ever approach the projects with a specific theme in mind from the start and sort of theme consistency, or do you find that as you're just sort of exploring?
I do start with a theme. It's not like I plan too much, but I just know that like, let's say doing something bold and colorful is my natural aesthetic. So a lot of the times I just tend to stick to it and try to do what comes in within that theme. It's not very narrow. I just try to like, let's say, use some shapes and use some colors, and then it's usually the first letter that decides what I'm going to do after that. So based on how the first letter goes, I just stick to that sort of a theme. Last year I did like sort of stick to the theme throughout, but before that I was like a little bit here and there. I didn't know what I was. Each letter turned out to be very, very different, and I didn't know, what style I wanted. So yeah, this year also I plan to have a specific style. So yeah.
Nice. Do you think that this time, so you're starting obviously with the 36 days of type right now for 2022. Do you know if you're going to keep like today's the first day, so you're doing the A. Do you think you're going to do every letter kind of completely different, or kind of stick with the same style that you create today?
No, I think I'm going to stick with the same style. I think that's more, when you put it up as a whole, it really comes together when it's a similar style. That being said, it doesn't have to, I also don't like it if it's very, very narrow within that specific style, because then people know what to expect, like, what's coming next. So it should be a bit unexpected, even if you follow a specific theme.
Totally.
So I'm just making a color palette here, like trying to do something pastel. Green.
So talk me through what is it that you're going through right now with the different colors?
So I'm trying to see if what colors I can apply here and see how it comes together. This is something totally experimental. This is exactly how I work. Normally I just put a color palette on the side and then see what's working, what's not. Color, I think, is very important for me. A lot of my work depends purely on the kind of colors that I use. So it really makes things stand out. And even if the form is, like, let's say, really good versus the color palette not being really good, it makes a huge difference. Maybe we can try going all warm. Just maybe pinks and reds, and see how that looks. So keeping the color sort of, again, repetition, keep repeating colors here and there, seeing how it comes together as a whole is important. I guess of course, using different colors, all over could be a bit chaotic. So something to keep in mind.
So we have a question in the chat around what gives you inspiration to go for these bold and multiple colors?
I think generally when things are colorful, it just stands out a lot more. And I feel like it just, like personally, I feel like it's a lot more impactful versus going for like earthy tones, let's say. Of course, earthy tones like fits a certain category. It's not like I don't use it at all. But when I do personal work, I just tend to stick to colorful, anything colorful that goes well together because it stands out a lot more than the others. And I've seen like work on Behance and Instagram, and you really stop when you scroll, you really stop when there's something like that bright. It makes you want to look there. So, being in an age like a digital age where it's all about posting work online, it's really important that people can stop and see what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I mean, looking through all of your work, it's all really colorful, and there's sort of like this vibrancy and almost personality and like energy that comes from it when you use really bold colors. And to your point, there's time for like monochromatic things, and like definitely it just sets a different mood depending on like the color scheme that you end up picking for things.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm just going to keep this here as one of my iterations. So what we're going to do is try making any of these letters and dimension. There's also since there's a new 3D feature on Illustrator, so now it gives me the flexibility to see how this looks in 3D. So I'm just going to try that as well. So before this game, I just used to, do it directly on Dimension. But doing something like this gives you an idea of, maybe things to change before you take it onto Dimension.
Yeah, so we're in Illustrator and you just went to Window, 3D, and Materials.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's pretty crazy that now you can do like some of this kind of 3D, like kind of basic work in Illustrator, which is awesome, just to like start to tease that out and start to see things like not in that 2D dimension.
Yeah, I think it's a really good feature. I mean, even for people who don't want to enter into the 3D, like don't want to use 3D software and it's too much for them, I think this is like a good starting point. So this is like a rendered version of how this looks. So I'm just going to leave it there. I think making things in 3D always builds on the file size. So I tend to keep it, I just do this to see how it looks, and then I go back to the 2D view of it. Just so that, while working, it's better to have file sizes that are smaller so that, everything works a lot faster.
I mean, I think we've all been there where that file size just gets so large that, yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. It's a good tip. And Amit is wondering, do you ever find yourself in a situation where you're using a lot of similar sets of colors that you're finding it's hard to move away from that or experiment with other palettes?
Yeah, it is. It definitely is. I use a lot of similar colors. So I think at one point I get pretty stuck on a similar color palette that I just use all the time. And now I think people know that if people see that color, they know that it's my work. It's become that obvious. So I think I should just start moving away from that.
It's hard, right? You get like kind of into particular colors and start to gravitate towards them. I feel like that's really natural.
Yeah. So I'm gonna just try making a smaller A. So I'm keeping that for capital and then just trying a very simple one. So this is what I made last year. So I'm just gonna do a 2D version of it and then head on to Dimension.
Yeah, so for anyone who's just joining the stream, we're joined by Anu, who is working on 3D illustration and thinking about like the 36 days of type. So been going through an Illustrator and starting to explore and just experiment with the different versions of the letter A and sort of abstracting that out. So we're just kind of digging into your process a bit more, which is fun to see. So I think one thing that was interesting too is before using a lot of sort of like the basic set shapes from the left-hand side, like using the circle and using the rectangle, and starting to use like the pen tool and just kind of free form, starting to like connect all of these shapes.
Yeah, definitely. I think that once you set like a certain a design language, then that's when I start using the pen tool and seeing how else I can change the shape. So this is like a certain form, a form that I made for my last year's 36 days. Kept it very, very, very simple. Didn't do, just did like 3 shapes and then added colors to it. And just to give you a reference of how it looks, there it is.
Awesome.
So this is what I converted this into, the illustration that you see here. And yeah, so I think I'm just gonna jump onto Dimension and run you through my process of how I got this.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, it's cool to see sort of like the beginning phase and then knowing what it's going to end up being, so we can kind of watch the process get from like the flat Illustrator kind of sketch to like this more like full 3D form.
So first, you have to set your artboard size. So I generally do 1600 pixels by 1600. But I think the standard, like for Instagram, is 1080 by 1080. I just do it slightly bigger because it's like when you render, sometimes when the image is too small, it starts to pixelate when you want to enlarge it. So it's just better to start bigger. I keep the resolution at 300, and yeah, so we can get started. So you have some basic shapes in the left. I'm starting with the sphere. You can also, so first I usually try to bring in the shape first and then set the camera angles to see, what sort of angle I want for the letter. So once I start building it, then I start playing around with the angles a bit. So let's say that is the counter section of the A. So one thing to notice is that as you keep clicking on the shapes here, it goes to the center point. So it just hides behind the shape that you already have. So just make sure to pull it in front to see it. And I changed the angles of the shape so that it's just easier for me to move around. So if it's like 90 degrees this way, I can move to the left and right, versus having this sort of angle, where it's more difficult for me to move it around in my space.
That's a good tip. So you're just changing the way, like the different path in which you can move the objects, just so it's easier for you to kind of start to shift things around.
Yeah, exactly. So one other tip would be to, so generally on Dimension, when you bring in the cylinder and the sphere, the circumference is the same of the cylinder and the sphere. So it's easier, like let's say you want to merge the sphere and the cylinder together. It's easier to do it. Obviously, it's easier to do it when the circumference is the same so that it merges seamlessly. So one thing to remember is as soon as you click on the shape and it comes on your screen, you can start merging it at that point of time versus changing the sizes and then trying to fit it in together. Sometimes it doesn't fit in perfectly because you need the exact circumference. So you can see that there's a slight like a protrusion happening there. So just gonna fix that. And then you can go around, resizing. So once you have that, once you know it's a seamless connection, then you can go around resizing and then maybe get this down. Take it slightly up.
That's a good tip. Yeah, because it's harder when you start to make the shapes different widths and then you realize you actually want them to be the same, right? And you're going back and you're like, oh,
yeah,
it's like just that, but like that much off.
And of course, on the right side, it almost works like Photoshop. On the right, you have different layers. So you bring in, you can hide the layers. It doesn't work in the sense of, putting a layer on top of the other. That works more in 2D. So in 3D, you can just see all your layers on the right, and then you can hide any shape that you want to. So what I'm doing here, I'm just gonna go back to Illustrator to show you again. So we have the circle here, the sphere here, we have a cylinder and a hemisphere, and then we have this drop shape here. So this is what I'm doing right now, where you have the sphere and then the stem of the A here. So now you can see that the camera is slightly tilted towards me, like it's sort of a angle that's towards me on the top. So I'm just gonna, so on the left, you have the camera angles. So if you click on the vertical one, I can just fix the vertical. So it moves this way. And on the top right, on the top here, you have the camera undo button. So if you want to go back to the view you had earlier, you can always do that. So let's see. So for this, I want my letter to be parallel to the side. So I can use the side of the artboard to have that, to know if it's parallel or not. So let's see, this is just like a quick reference that I have used. I find it like a lot easier to just adjust to see like if things are parallel or not. So this is like a straight up, like an eye level view. So that's what I'm looking for. Yeah.
I know you've been doing sort of 3D stuff for a while. We had a question in the chat around, other than Dimension, like have you tried using any other 3D softwares?
Yeah, I've tried using Cinema 4D. I haven't learned it yet. Trying to learn it. And I use a lot of SolidWorks now. I actually do packaging design for in my courses. So SolidWorks is a software that I've started using for packaging. I think it's pretty useful. The software is a bit complex, but I think it works. I mean, if you know Cinema 4D, it's like, I'm sure it's pretty easy to use SolidWorks as well. So that's one thing that I've started using these days. That's more, I would say, for like industrial design. You do a lot more product design on it. So, but because I know it, I've been using it for like my own creative work as well. So you can see that it's starting to come together. So So this is the drop shape. You have the cylinder, the sphere, and the sphere. Again, to quickly give you the reference, the drop shape is what we have as the terminal over here. I'm just gonna bring this closer. So where this is useful is that you know that you have the different parts of the letter. So let's say I have my terminal, I have my stem, and I have the counter or the bowl. So the bowl is the outside curve and the counter is what forms inside. So in this case, I've combined, like it's just a sphere. So it's like a combined thing over here. So now tweaking it a bit to make sure that the top is the top of the drop and the top of the stem starts at the same point. So you can always check this by taking the shape to the left, seeing whether the starting point is the same. Some minor tweaks that you have to keep doing as you design. Bringing my letter to the center, of course, because it's just the letter, so you want it to be on the center of the screen. So now what you can do is just to add a little bit more more curves to it. I can use bevel on the on the cylinder. So I generally use the scale that you have here, but you can always use the scale on the side, on the right side of your panel here, where you can adjust it by each centimeter.
Yeah, and the contextual panel on the right-hand side is helpful too. When you have, say, like you had another cylinder somewhere else and you wanted to match and like end up matching the bevels or something like that, you can always go back over, kind of check what you've been using and apply that onto the other shapes you have.
Yeah. So I'm just going to start saving this. This, I think every designer goes through, like just saving your work as you keep doing it. Always a good habit.
Such a good tip. Yeah. Save.
Yeah, always.
Yeah.
So now I think what you can do is basically keep, for this form in particular, I like to have the counter bigger than the terminal here. So you can see, like, as you keep changing things, you can see, for example, if I make it smaller, that something is off, like, it's not right as a letter form. So it's always nicer to have the counter big and then the terminal smaller. And this is just like for my specific letter form. So as you make different things, I'm sure it's different, but you sort of get the hang of it as you keep looking at more things that people are doing and see how they tackle each letter. So you just keep learning as you keep seeing. So it's good to, keep going through Instagram or Pinterest and seeing how different people do things.
Is that how you get like a lot of your inspiration? I know we had a question in the chat around just like your inspiration in general, like how do you get inspired and where do you go to get inspired?
Yeah, I think it started off with just looking, with just trying. I wouldn't say it was an inspiration at the start. I just started trying to put different letter forms together, and then I started looking at Pinterest and Behance to see what people are doing just by using very, very simple forms, because it's always more like I believe that you can always get more creative when you have more limitations. So just by using, let's say, 3 or 4 shapes, what can you do? So that's how I start looking for things. And I set my limitation first, and then I start looking for things, versus seeing what's out there and then, trying to create something.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I know for sure, like we were talking about earlier, like knowing when to stop, like having sometimes the limitations, like,
Yeah.
hey, there's 36 days of type, I have to get this one letter done, and that's sort of my time frame. Can be sort of the same for just like the work itself, knowing that you have just like certain forms or whatever that you're going to be using. And Becca in the chat, yes, these are not merge shapes, just line them up exactly
Yes.
to match.
Yeah, that's you can't merge shapes yet on Dimension, like, so you have to like just line them up. And I think Dimension has also given me this great thing of having limitations, like the comment in the chat, when you can't merge things, you just learn how to stack things up and see how things look. So it's a great starting point. I'm starting to add material now. I like to generally, I think I like this sort of soft matte touch. So I'm gonna go with matte, and then you can always. So matte gives you like this very, very smooth, nice, texture, but I want it to shine a bit. So I'm just gonna go to roughness over here. I can show you where that comes from. So when you click on the shape, you have the color here, and then you have the base color, and you have all these other properties. So I'm just gonna pull the roughness down so you can start to see it change. So if you take it completely to the left, it starts to become really shiny and becomes like plastic. So I'm gonna keep it somewhere in between, so you get the shine and the sort of matte effect. I'm gonna do that to all the other shapes as well. You can keep it at about 50%.
Like when it starts to get so fun. I mean, I love this stage of like starting to really get into like the textures and what the colors are going to be, and it like really is like going to start to come to life.
Yeah, this is like when you see your own thing come to life, it's like gets you more excited to try more things. So that's a good, like, this is the time for you to, sort of experiment with material and color. So this is so these are the colors that I used here, but I think we can sort of change it up and see what other colors we can use. Maybe let's try doing earthy, since it's something that I never do. So going against what I usually do. So maybe an olive green. Brown and maybe blue, like. So one thing you can do is always use the preview render on the top right here. So it just gives you a quick understanding of how it'll look when it's rendered. So you can, as you keep adding material and color, you can keep using this feature here to see how it's all coming together. So I'm not happy with the brown here because I think the blue and the green are like sort of going well together. So let's try something else. Maybe we can do a monotone. So let's try all olive greens maybe. And as you select the colors, it keeps coming up on the panel over here. So it's just easier to select colors that you've already been using.
Well, and it looks like when you're kind of going through and exploring like the different colors, you tend to stay like when in this similar maybe vibrancy or sort of tone of colors. So if you're using kind of pastel-y colors, you're kind of like all of them maybe are pastel, versus like everything being like really neon or something like that, and kind of being in more that right-hand side of the color palette over there. So interesting, like there's a ton of things you can play with in terms of color. And I'm curious, like, what do you think about when you're going through and selecting all of your different colors?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think when you like you don't want because this is just one form. It all the shapes need to come together to form one, one letter. It's better to keep the colors on the same shade or tint or whatever it is you're using, because you don't want elements to stand out a lot from the other. You want it to be in the similar sort of space and not see one more than the other. So I think that's why it's better to keep the same sort of tone or the shade, or if it's dark, generally overall you just keep everything darker. Yeah, like I think that's mostly what I do. I don't that it's for this specific thing. Otherwise, I wouldn't say that it always applies. I do when you want things to stand out, you apply colors that certain way. And yeah, I think that's usually the process that I follow while selecting colors. And I take a lot of time, like now I'm just trying to like not I'm trying to stay in the zone of trying to select colors faster. But I really take a lot of time while selecting color. I go through so many rounds of just trying to change shades a little bit here and there, and then rendering it, and then again going back and changing the shade again. So yeah, I think that's like my weakness, to just keep playing with color all the time.
Totally. I know that sometimes I'll end up like seeing some artwork, or I don't know, going out and like taking a photo and like finding that there's colors that I'm like, oh, I really like the tones of the way that all this stuff kind of matches up, and just kind of source from that sometimes and like pick and choose, or kind of use Adobe Color and like pull those color tones in, because sometimes there's just like inspiration you see somewhere else that like can help inspire you, and other times it's like a process like this where you're just like, I'm just gonna like start to play and see what like works well.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think you can definitely take color palette references. It's all, there's so many references that you can take. So I guess at this point, finding such a unique color palette becomes hard, because it's, everything is just already out there. So when you start to play around with it on your own, you do tend to find better color combinations, I would say. So when I render it, I do feel like it's still looking a lot more matte than I wanted it to. So I'm just going to go back and fix the roughness. So making it a little more shinier. Sorry. Yeah. Lighting also plays a huge role in how the material looks. So sometimes even when you do a little bit of that shiny texture, if you just change the lighting, it looks like a lot. So that's something to, again, keep in mind. What do you think? Do you think these colors are working?
Let us know in the chat what you think. Are you liking this
Yeah.
color theme, or like compared to some of the other tones? Were there ones that you liked more, or that you want to see Anu play with? Definitely let us know. There's so many material choices, right? And so many color
Yeah.
tones as well, right? Like from texture to just like the colors themselves.
Yeah, just too many options. It's a problem even when there are too many options.
Right, yeah. Well, I think it's important too, to your point, like as you're going through, like continually checking the preview, because that also will just change just the slightest ways of how you're seeing everything and what the actual output's going to be.
So now I'm playing around a bit with the lighting. You have lighting presets here on the left. So You can choose them and then you can play around with it on the right. So you can change the intensity and the rotation. It depends what the lighting is. Sometimes there are more things you can change. So just gonna.
People are coming through in the chat saying like Rohan was like amazing. Amit, yes, love it. Anthony said the color combination works. Someone else said metal pastel, like one of these little emojis, like the thinking emojis. Look, and then Chirag was saying looks very metallic. I like it.
Okay, great. So I'm just gonna stick with this then. Yeah, I think that's good. Save again. Just as a reminder to keep saving your work. Now, I think let's try changing the background. Usually, I never keep things pure white. I always do like a off-white. Maybe it doesn't make a big difference when you just see the off-white, but when you do a white versus the off-white, you definitely see like a huge difference. It just adds, just adds always a slight bit more character, but it's just slightly, not the pure white.
I feel that way too about like a off black when it's not quite black.
Yeah.
I always talk about that and people are always like, you're so sweet. I'm like, no, but like an off black. I love a good black. So I get it. An off white. I love that. Yeah, and Bliss was saying in the chat that they like that Dimension was being used. And yeah, for anyone who is just joining, I think it's cool that you started in Illustrator, kind of showing us your process of inspiration, kind of sketching there, just sort of flat in 2D, and then bringing that in mind when you go to this more 3D space and Dimension to start to play with the forms and bring them to life.
Yeah, I think this is like a good for anybody who's new to 3D software and is new to Dimension. This, like whatever I'm doing now, is a great starting point. It's very simple, nothing complex, just taking different shapes and putting it together. So anybody who wants to attempt this year's 36 days using Dimension, I think you should definitely go for it.
And I think what's awesome about the 36 days of type 2 is, and I'm sure you know this having done like it last year as well, is like in the end you have like this goal of like, and then you have like an entire portfolio of all these letters that you've made, and but you take it like kind of step by step, so it's like smaller chunks, like just one letter a day, which is nice. But it's really cool to see what everyone ends up making in terms of like these huge packs of just like 36.
Yeah, it definitely adds to like, if I mean, every designer has their portfolio, so I think this is something that it's an easy add. I would say if you can, even if you do it halfway, I would say that that's still a good thing to add to your portfolio. It's you can do something on that works for you. You can get however creative you want. It's entirely up to you. You have all the freedom. So this versus going for like a client sort of brief. So this is a place where you can definitely express yourself better.
That's true. That's a really good point. And I think that what's interesting too is like portfolio work. I think it's so important to like show the type of work of the jobs that you want, or like the type of work that you want to be doing, because that's where people go to see like what you're making, and they're going to come to you for that type of work of what you're putting on your portfolio. So even if you say you have client work, but it's not necessarily what you want to be doing, and maybe this is what you want to do, it's great to try and find that spare time to do a passion project, like something like
definitely
have for your portfolio, and to like be more playful or do the type of style or work that you want to do.
Definitely. So once you're happy with what you have, you go to the render tab on top. You can name your file. You can decide low, medium, or high. I'm just gonna go with low. Gives you like sort of, it almost acts like a preview. It gives you a slightly pixelated version. The medium gives you a better version, and the high gives you the best. So just gonna go to medium. You can do, for export, you can do a Photoshop file or a PNG. I don't need the Photoshop file, so I'm just gonna untick that and just do a PNG. Gonna save it. And yeah, when you click on render, I also like this part where, it just keeps rendering and you see it get better and better and better, starting from the pixelated view to the best view. So yeah, when you use it in the beginning, it's nice to see. Now that I'm used to it, I just started working on other things.
The magic has worn off a little for you. You can never lose the magic.
So while that's happening, we can go back to Illustrator. And this is, again, something that I already showed you earlier, but this is how it looks when things come together. We can just wait for, it should happen pretty quickly. And again, one thing to keep in mind is, depending on the number of shapes and the textures that you use, it affects your render timing. So because I have used just a few shapes and and the same texture actually for all of them, so the render time will be lesser, versus even if you have the same thing and you change the material of, let's say, the drop or the sphere, that could take slightly more time to render. I think that's like something just to keep in mind for render time.
Yeah, you just get up, get a snack or get a drink, rendering. Totally. Also, I love you're like inspiring people to try this 36 days of type, which I'm super stoked about. I know Lilith was saying that they were feeling inspired and might be considering doing the 36 days of type. You should totally do it. Go for it. I think that'd be awesome. And I know Carol, sounds like they're in the home stretch of working on their alphabet. So good luck and excited to see what they're making.
Yeah, definitely go for it. I would say this is where I started my 3D journey. So I think for those of you who are just starting out, this is a great way to start out. And you can see, I can just go back to my letters just to show you. Now that you've seen my process, I think it's nice for you to understand the other different forms that I've done using the similar shapes. Let's see whether this opens up. So just to tell you a bit about how I did this. This is the cylinder with 2 spheres on the side. This is something we did for the A as well, just with 1 cylinder. So this has 1 cylinder and 2 spheres on the side, sorry. And this shape is a torus, which I can show you. Is this done rendering? Not yet. Okay, so we can come back to that. So this is basically a torus, which is again a ready-made shape on Dimension with 2 spheres on the sides to give it that curve. And the center is just a sphere. So it's as simple as that, again, using the same materials, the matte material with a slight shine, just to give it that, I feel like matte makes it look slightly flat. So the minute you give it a shine, it just makes it look more 3D. That's why I prefer using the shine. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So this is basically what I've followed almost for basically everything. Yeah.
It's so amazing. It's fun because I feel like each one individually has so much like character and kind of personality. And I think with 3D, what's nice is there's sort of like this like sense of gravity that starts to come into play when you have like the balance and everything going on. But as like a set, it's just like fun to see what you end up making for all of them.
Yeah, I think, I've got a lot of questions about how I did 36 days, and I've also got a lot of traction after doing 36 days in 3D using Dimension. So, again, like great starting point. Like I've said like multiple times now, like it's a good way to start. And since tomorrow is B, I can also like quickly run you through this, where again, cylinder, and this is a torus. And this is a flattened sphere. So it's the same sphere that I've used, but I've just flattened it a bit to make it look like to have it come forward. behind and have the cylinder behind. So anybody who wants to try this on your own, please go ahead and try it. And you can also keep tweaking it as you keep making it, because everybody has their own design aesthetics. So you can add, let's say you can maybe add more elements. One idea would be, instead of having one cylinder here, maybe what if you try two cylinders and then just put them together so you have two lines. That's some ways you can just keep tweaking. Maybe you can have this as a starting point and see, where this takes you.
Love it. I love the like squashed cylinder on this one, like a little flat pancake there.
Yeah.
And I know someone was asking in the chat, like if it was animated, I think because your site has maybe some GIFs going through, or have you done any animation, or maybe if you just go back to your portfolio for a second.
Right. Actually, this is just a GIF. I just put letters together and made it a GIF. I think a reason why I did that was it's always good to have some movement here and there when you show your portfolio. So this is, and I don't do a lot of animation. So this is just one way to just like slightly make things more attractive. Just few like small things you can do to catch somebody's attention versus just having one letter, flat over here.
Yeah. And I know someone was wondering, for last year's challenge, did you start with the set color palette? I know we've been talking a little bit about your process with colors, but for that project specifically, how did you go ahead with that one?
Yeah, I didn't start with a set color palette. I just knew that I wanted to use bright colors. So I just, sorry, I can go back to that again. I just started using, let's say once I did A, B, C, and D, then I knew that I wanted to have these colors repeat again. So for example, like the D, I have the green here, and then the red here, and then the yellow. So I followed the same colors for the N as well. So I just make sure that I have, because everything, once you see the set as a whole, let me see. Yeah, once you see the set as a whole, it all needs to come together, even if you use different colors. So repetition, like I mentioned earlier, keep repeating the colors here and there as you keep using them. It definitely brings, everything as a set.
Here's the real, keep this one up for a second. Here's the real question I have for you. Do you have a favorite, like one letter or number from this series? And I'm curious, in the chat, what is your favorite letter or number from this series?
I love the 0 over here. I love that one. And I also really like the P. I can just open it up. Let's see if I can go to the, yeah, 0 is right here. I like this. I think it looks quite playful and different. I also love the colors, just keeping it on the warmer side, but also still making it look bright and attractive. So now, so one tip for this would be, when shapes go smaller, I always tend to use slightly bolder and brighter colors there. So then the spheres here have the brightest color. And then as the shapes get bigger, I tend to go lower in terms of like the shade. So maybe a little lighter for the two like the hemisphere kind of shapes that I've used here. Because I mean, when you see something, the biggest thing like catches your attention. So when you apply a bright color to a bigger shape, your attention only goes there and doesn't flow through the rest of the letter. So it's always better to keep a balance by giving lighter colors to bigger shapes and darker colors to smaller shapes.
Yeah, I like the 0 too. I like how this one really has a lot of like balancing act that you can imagine. Yeah. So I like this one.
I would also love to hear what everybody else likes as their favorite letter or number. So
totally. I know Wade in the chat was saying the Q is legit.
Yeah, I do like the Q. I do like, it looks like clay, so that's why I really like it. It's like curving, the curves really make it look like clay. So I
Yeah,
think,
the ads was fun too. There's a lot of good ones. And for those of you who are just joining, I know there was a question around were all of these done in Dimension? I believe this is like the process that you're going through today is the exact process that you went through to make that entire series. So it's kind of cool. Everyone here is getting like a sneak peek into like
yeah,
the process from start of just like exploring different typefaces and then the process of starting Illustrator and going into Dimension. So yes, all of those were made using Dimension.
yes. So the render here is done. So once the render is done, this is how it'll look. It'll give you like a preview, and then wherever you saved your file, it pops on there. So let's bring that in and see how that looks. Illustrator is like a bowl which I just like start dumping everything to, just to compare, to sketch things out and everything. So my Illustrator files do get messy sometimes. Yeah.
Sorry, I won't tell anyone. That's how it goes. I like it. It's like kind of it's like the notebook, right? You're just
Yeah.
sketching and doing all the freeform stuff, and then Dimension sort of where you're getting your actual output.
Yeah.
People are definitely showing some love to this right now and saying that they love like a lot of the letters that you just had, and that like it kind of looks like Play-Doh in a way, and like
Yeah,
just like a lot
exactly.
of
Yeah.
like fun, like colorful pieces coming together.
Yeah. So yeah, this is like the A that we just created now for anybody who's joining in. The right is what we created now. The left is what I did last year. You can see some differences in sizes here and there. The colors, obviously, you can see that it makes a huge difference, just the color. Again, going back to what I said earlier, when I scroll on Instagram, like my attention to each image that I see, that it's barely like a few seconds, right? You want to catch somebody's attention. So, which is why personally I prefer like the left one, where I know that it's definitely going to catch my eye versus the one on the right. But again, it's something that I mean, it's not like you can make all decisions based on how it looks digitally. It just has to fit your sort of aesthetic. So yeah, definitely. I mean, it's up to you. Definitely, if you want to go for like lighter colors, go for it. It's just my like, I'm so used to using bright colors that now I just go towards that side. Whatever sort of, whatever anything that I see, I just go towards like a brighter color side.
I think it's nice also seeing like the side by side. And I feel like sometimes when I can't decide, sometimes I will take and do one color set, kind of make it, set it aside, work on another version, and then do this kind of like one up next to each other and maybe like step away from it and come back. And
Yeah.
sometimes that answer is like really clear to me the next time I see it. I'm like, oh, I definitely like gravitate way more to the other one.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point of just stepping away, because if you keep looking at things, you just don't know what to do. There's like a creative block. So it's definitely good to step away and then come back and see how things look. For sure, you see it very differently.
And you had mentioned like the torus shape, and I know
Oh
Mariana
yeah, sorry.
was wondering, like maybe if you end up looking at the torus shape, Mariana was wondering, like, can you bevel a torus shape?
I don't think you can. Let's try that. Since I spoke about it earlier,
Let's try it out. Yeah, there you go.
just gonna hide one layer and try that. So this is the torus that I was talking about that I used in my other letters. What you can do, so for the two, let's go back to the two, yeah, which is right here. So this curved, like the circular shape that you see, that's the torus. So let's jump back here. So what I did was I sliced it to 90, I think. Yeah. So I'm just gonna hide this as well. Yeah, so you can't bevel a torus, but this is what I had done for the two. And let's see, I'll just bring it up close to this. And what you can do is adjust the ring radius and the pipe radius. So if you want to make it look a bit thicker, you can do that. And
It's
then,
quite a bit thicker.
yeah. Yeah, you can basically play around with the ring and the pipe radius. Then just to quickly show you what I did there, it was what I did was get the sphere to the corner and then start to align it. So changing the camera. So you can start to align it this way. And like I mentioned earlier, so now it gets tough to align because the circumference is different. Sorry, the diameter is different. So it starts to get a bit tricky to align, but you have to make sure, yeah, sort of. It's just a quick, yeah. So the more you do it, the faster you can align. So because I'm used to doing this, it's much it's like quicker for me. But yeah, so you just keep trying to see how you can align things, and it just comes to you, as you practice, it starts coming together. So this is what I used for it to curve on both the sides here, like the top curve and then the curve here. So yeah.
It's awesome. And I know Kara was wondering, so you're talking about sort of like merging these shapes a little bit or just trying to get them right up to each other. And Carol's asking, once it renders, do the seams disappear?
It does disappear. If you align it correctly, it does disappear. If it doesn't, you can always go fix it you can always correct things on Photoshop. So again, a great tool to just fix few things here and there. So let's try rendering.
If you have it the same color and the same material and they are lined up properly, you won't see the seam.
You won't see the seam. That's right.
Having it slightly off, or you have different textures there, the lighting hitting it in a certain way, you'll probably be able to see that difference in depth.
Yeah. So now you can see there's like the line that you can see. That means it's not perfectly aligned. So things like that you can always go fix on Photoshop. So once it's rendered, you can take the file to Photoshop and just clean up those lines. It's a lot quicker actually than being here and trying to align it like absolutely perfectly, which may take a lot longer. So Photoshop, yeah, definitely you can go in there and try to fix this. It's like a very easy fix if you just go through that with I think it's a spot healing tool. So if you just go across with the spot healing tool, it just fixes that immediately. So the next thing, so since we've done a letter, I thought we can try out a quote. So this is a quote. Again, opening up an artboard. I got a lot of questions about this quote too, so I thought I'll show you guys how I did it. So the quote that I'm gonna work on is it's a hairy situation. And we're gonna try doing a bit of it, doing a rough version of it on Illustrator, and then moving on into Dimension. Okay, I guess I can start with the basic font. Let's see, I'll just do a Helvetica. So we have so these are the different words that you have in this. So the first thing to do is figure out how you can make all of these come together as a good layout. So since we're working in a square format, so generally, like I try to, maybe make the hairy bigger so that it starts to fit in as a square. Then maybe you can keep it on the left and A on the right. So now this is like a very rough sort of layout that I know that I want to use. Now the challenge is to try and figure out, so there's a huge gap over here. So how do you fill that gap? So maybe maybe the S is really long. Let's just, you would never like actually expand this, but just to give you an example, is like, let's say you design a S that's like really big. So then that fills up some gap. So let's say you do the A really big. So that fills up some gap. So this is just to give you an idea of how things can change, but you would never actually, expand a letter. That's something you have to, the S, if you want the S wide, that's something you have to design. You don't just expand the letter. So the font that I used here is called Don Jose. So that's like a free font that I got. You guys can download it too, and it gives you these different kinds of textures in the text. So you have the plain black, then you have this sort of hairy thing, which I wanted. I wanted that for the hairy word. Then you have this sort of, I don't know, like a fingerprint sort of texture. Then you have this coding sort of thing, and then this. So there are different
textures. Is actually exactly what that is. I was about to say like wood grain, but you said fingerprint, and I was like, that's 100% what that one was.
Yeah. So for this particular one, because it says hairy, and I want it to look like the word should express what the texture is. So I'm going to go with that. And then oops. So let's say I use the same thing here. So I'm going to mix it up, use the font in some places, use this font in some places, and probably keep it flat in the others. So let's say I just have this black. So again, an important thing which I mentioned earlier is to have some sort of repetition. So if I just had this word in this particular texture and font, and not had this anywhere else around, this would attract a lot of attention. And if you want to do that, then that's great. But I wanted attention everywhere, like a balance of it. So I'm going to use this font a bit, like maybe on the top right, top left, and then on the top right. So then you have a balance throughout the layout. So now, since this word is going like really small, so what you can always do is like split it up. Bring this together. Then maybe increase the size of this so that it comes.
You can always just shortcut. I think it's
together.
Shift and like the arrow up or down when you're clicking on it, just to like do it super fast or super slow there.
Yeah. So if you want it like to the point, then you can use the arrows. Otherwise, you can just like go bigger and smaller. So I'm gonna use the same thing here. I tend to do a lot of everything that I play around with is usually on Dimension. So I do like a very basic layout on Illustrator just to see how things are looking. And then I start to get things together on Dimension.
And I think everyone has a different process. Like some people might start like on a notepad and be writing down with the pen and sketching, or you might end up in Illustrator, kind of like this. I think with like fonts, but it's really particular and you're going to be kind of transforming that into 3D, it can be helpful to come into Illustrator like this and kind of be working around, because it is going to be pretty particular in that sense.
So I'm just gonna jump on to on Dimension now. Just gonna remove that. So for text on Dimension, there's under basic shapes, you have text. So that gets text to your center of your screen. Then what you can do is on the right, you have under text, you have the different sort of fonts that you can use. So I'm just gonna go ahead and use the font that I had used on Illustrator. Takes a few seconds to come up. Yeah. So when I make it bigger, you can see that sort of that hairy kind of feeling that this has. Next, what you can do is bevel. So let's see that change. Yeah, you can see what happened, right? That when it bevels, it makes this, all the texture turns into like, comes forward and starts beveling. So you get this 3D texture on it.
It's like so much harsher. It's like crazy the difference that like small things can make as you start to like play and get familiar with all the sliders and what they do. This one kind of looks like, I don't know, like carved like stone or like a like sculpture, kind of like plaster or something like that.
Yeah.
Very different from Harry, when you think of like sort of like a, I don't know, soft hair, something like that.
Yep.
I think one of the important things too about like when you're working on something like this with typography, and you talking about like filling the space and how you had like gaps between its A and those words, is like what your final output's going to be. Like I know you right now have sort of a square shape because you know, oh, I'm going to post this to Instagram or whatever the output's going to be. And so that's really important for your layout. Versus if you knew you were going to have sort of a, you know, really rectangular kind of thin banner or something like that, then it would really influence kind of the layout design.
Right, yeah. So you can play around with the depth of it. So you can see that changing. We're going to increase the depth, it goes behind, and then you can, whatever suits your design, you can set it at that much. So now this is something that I have already, and let's try. So now I'm going to do the it's and the situation. I will do a couple of letters and then I will switch over to the file that I have where I've already created this. So let's see for the eye. Actually, let's try the torus for eye. Yeah.
Love a good Taurus now.
Yeah, since we've been speaking about it, so let's try that. So eye has like a stem and then a sphere on top. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a stem using these toruses stacked one on top of the other. And you can always hide things that you don't need. So I'm just gonna hide this. Let's try making this bigger. Then sphere, take it up, make it a size that'll be proportionate to the stem below. So it can be as simple as this, even for your 36 days. If you just want to create eye like this, it's an eye, which is, I mean, it's just like done in like a minute or less than a minute. So a lot of things you can explore. So let's say that's my eye, and I want to create a T.
Do you find that there are certain letters that are always a little bit more difficult to play around with, or does it just depend on what you're working on?
No, it does. I think, yeah. I think the simpler the letter, the harder it is to figure out how creative it can be. So I is definitely one of them. It's such a simple like form in general. The shape is so simple that it gets harder to figure out how much, like creatively, how much you can push it, because finally it still has to be readable as an eye. So yeah, I think the simpler the letter, the harder it is.
Interesting, yeah.
So 2 cylinders for this one, for the T. Pretty simple, like nothing complicated here. Just so the torus for the stem of the eye, the sphere, and then the 2 cylinders for the T.
So quick, just like that, done.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So the angle at which you keep your letters, for example, I know that my its is going to start somewhere in the corner here, right? Because it's the first word, so it's going to start somewhere here. So now when you see the T, you see that there's more space on the left and there's lesser space on the right. Even though it might be correct when you see it at an eye, when you see it straight up, like at an eye level, it's probably correct. But when you take it to the left, obviously because of the angle at which you're seeing it, it makes it look like there's more space and less space on one side. So then that you can adjust like based on wherever you plan to set the word. So I'm gonna like just push this to the left just so that when I see it, it looks like there's equal space on the right and the left. And you can also see that the sphere and this cylinder are pretty close by, and that wasn't the case when it was in the center. So again, shifting that a bit just to give it slight breathing space.
It's a great call out because yeah, you're in a 3D space, right? So you have to remember like how things are going to look like straight on versus kind of up in the corner versus over here, back, and like all of that perspective. And I think it's a stylistic choice too. Like you can decide what you end up wanting to do and what like the output is, or if you want to change the camera angle and have everything sort of at, a different perspective. But again, like I think to your point, if you end up wanting it to all look straight on, but like they're 3D to your point, you can just start to it just a little bit like this.
Right. So this is like, let's say I want my these 2 letters to be this way in the whole quote that I'm using. Another quick tip: when you select 2 shapes together and then click on a material, then it sort of groups itself together. So groups itself in terms of material and colors. So now when I change the color of one shape, it's going to change the color of both. So whichever, if you have multiple things that you want in the same material and color, so it's always good to select everything, select the material, and then if you change the color of one, it just changes the color of all of them. And I can also introduce some patterns over here. So Dimension gives you the option of allowing you to add some, not just color, but also some patterns or images that you may want to add. So I have a pattern here that I'm going to go ahead and add. It's like a striped pattern, and you can adjust the, so yeah, that's how it is. And you can adjust the number of times that the pattern repeats using this repeat section here. So if you increase it, you can see that the repeat increases, so the pattern gets smaller. And then if I have this at 0, it's basically for going into the blue that's over here. So which is why you can't see a pattern. So the minute you start to increase it, then you start to see the pattern.
It's so trippy. I love it.
And let's give this also some color. It's nice to use pattern and colors together versus using just like patterns all throughout, again, because it's like gets so chaotic with patterns. So a nice balance always works well.
And I think to your point earlier, it kind of depends where you want the focal point to be. Like if you want one thing that really draws your eye to it, kind of thinking about the color and the boldness or the texture that it has, versus if you do want there to be more balance in terms of like the visual weight of everything. You know, you've mentioned, oh, like I'll put the pattern kind of here and sort of spread it out in different areas, or use the same typeface in different places, just that the eye kind of moves around and there's a little bit of more balance there.
Yeah. So let's see if I just put it back in the center. It's definitely, I mean, as you keep fixing it, you can see the changes. So like now that I've got it to the center, again, the spacing is a bit off. So yeah, it just depends on where you want to position your letters. So that's, let's say that's one part of it. And again, you can always do a preview render to see how that's coming together. So now I'm just going to go ahead and open up the file where I've created the whole thing. And on Dimension, you can't open like multiple tabs like how you do on Photoshop. So it's always better to save whatever you're doing first and then go ahead and open up something else. So let's say I just want to save this.
Always good to save.
Yes.
We've all been there where something crashes or something didn't save and you're like, did I save it? Did I?
It's a nightmare when you try it, but it doesn't save.
Hurt the heart quite a bit, yes. Well, and for those of you who are just joining, we have still like another half an hour, which is awesome with Anu here, but been going from the process of sketching and sort of ideating and exploring in Illustrator around the different typefaces, and then coming into Dimension and seeing all of this madness with textures and materials and bringing it into 3D. So awesome to see. Like, this is the quote that you made last year, is that right?
Yes, yeah. This is the quote that I made last year. During the lockdown, I was like, let's make something that goes with the lockdown theme. And I was like, okay, like I should do, it's a hairy situation because everybody was in like some or the other different situation.
Totally.
So this was like a lockdown thing that I did. Yeah, so this is like a huge upgrade to what I had shown like just a few minutes earlier. So I'm just going to break apart this file so that you can see how it's all come together. So the basics that I covered was the 2 cylinders that I used, and then the toruses, and then the sphere on top, and then adding a pattern. So this is pretty much what I've done throughout. And then the hairy in that particular font to bevel it. And yeah, so I think in the previous file, I covered whatever separate elements that you'll have to probably work on before putting everything together. And so once you have those separate elements, what you can do is start to put all the other letters together and see what sort of layout you want. So the layout, previously I had shown that to you on Illustrator, where I know that it's a square and I'm trying to put, like, for example, I split up the situation word into two. So the dimension of your artboard decides how you want to split a word or how you want to do the layout of the whole quote. So how I have, so there was a spacing issue here that I spoke about earlier. So because all the other words are big and then you have just two words here. So one way to tackle that problem is to do the A, like for example, I did the A big so that it takes up more space. And then instead of adding a bar, so this is again like the 36 days of type exercise that we did. Instead of adding a bar here, I have like a sphere or oval shape over here. So that just gives you a different sort of character. And few other things that I used: repetition. So where I used the font here, and then you have the S again in that font, the S here in the font, and then a couple of other letters in that particular font. So it's not like your attention is just on, like, right bang on in the center. It keeps your eyes moving around because of that sort of harmony it creates. Let's see. So I'm just gonna show you. So these two are cylinders. Here I used a torus. So I just sliced it in half. Again, we spoke about this earlier. The torus is right here. Right here on the left, just going to quickly show you how I did that A at the back. So this is what it is. And then you can slice it into half, say 180, turn it to 90. And then what I did was I just extended it this way. So you can see like the similarity between this and the shape at the back, the A at the back. Then I just went ahead and added, first material. So let's say I want matte, and then I go to image, and then add the pattern to it. So this is basically how I did the A, and then I just added like a sphere in the center. And yeah, so the quick A over here.
I think it's fun that the A, in a way, like it's legible as you're reading. You're like, oh, it's A here, and you kind of know in the sentence form. You can take a little more liberty with the letters because they start. You're kind of familiar with what the word forms are going to be. But so I think it's fun that like the A is also like very similar to the U in a way, right? Like you have that kind of parallel.
Right.
So
yes,
kind of becomes really playful.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So just to touch upon the U, just turned the A, brought it down. So let me just get this ahead so that you can see what I'm working on. That's it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I just got the A down, just turned it up to make a U, and placed it in that position, and that's it. And then there's another same thing. I just decreased the size and put it inside the U, just to make like a double line. The I, as you can see, is multiple toruses here, and I also repeated that here. So now here is where I wanted situation to read as one word. I mean, it is one word, and you want it to read as one word. So the I covering both the situation on the top and bottom is one way that it just tells you that it's one word, just how the I is linking the top and the bottom together. So this is again a quick way for you to, if you're splitting up something, you want to make it more readable, try picking out some letters where you can see that. I mean, if there are two A's, see if you can connect them, or if there are two U's, see if you can connect them. So that's the same thing I did here. Because there were two I's, I decided to make like one long I And then that is like a link up between the top and the bottom. So you sort of know that it's one word.
It's so awesome. It's really fun. And it's fun to see like the final output here. I know we had someone in the chat who was saying, hey, like I'm new to Dimension. Is it difficult to operate Dimension? I think one of the like beautiful things is like you can follow along Anu's process from the beginning of today's stream. And it like really breaks down like the very beginning of the process and just how to start with a letter form, because I think it can be really overwhelming sometimes when you see like the output that like people make on Behance or wherever it is. And you're like looking and you're like, wow, like I can get really overwhelmed to just looking at like this like one quote and be like, I don't know, like I don't know where I would begin or something like that. But seeing people's process and just kind of taking it step by step, and like the more you kind of play with it and just get familiar with the basics, I think the more that you'll be able to feel comfortable and take like liberties and start to work on things like this.
Yeah, I think this took me a bit of time, obviously, because it's bigger and each you have to figure out the pattern for each letter, the color, the texture, and everything. So that takes a bit of time. But taking it one step at a time, where I just did the INT first, and then that's it. Like that took maybe like 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So if you're new to it, it might take a bit longer. Let's say 15 minutes to 30 minutes to just make the I and the T. If you just follow my process, or even if you want to change it up a bit, it's because we're creating a whole quote, you don't have to focus a lot on like each letter being so different versus how you would do for 36 days, where the importance of 36 days is that each letter is different. But in this case, you have a lot of letters coming in together. So it's nice to keep things simple. And then when it comes together as a whole, it's quite like this. You can see there's patterns, there's texture, there's colors. So there's already so much going on. So when you work on each letter separately in a simple manner, you can always make things more complex if you feel like it's simple versus the other way around. I think things that are complex, I mean, if you have to simplify it, it's a lot harder, I feel, versus the other way around. So again, something to keep in mind while you design. So I'm going to change the camera angle here just to show you how this works. So I've put like a plane at the back, just so that all your letters can sit on that plane. And this gives you a certain kind of shadow. So I can explain with this. So if I remove the plane at the back and I just do like a render preview. So this is like how it looks, versus if I have the plane at the back and I render, it gives you this sort of shadow at the back, which really adds to the whole like the 3D effect of it. Like it gives you, like, shadows always add a bit more character. So when you have something like this, when you don't have the background plane, it just feels like it's hollow at the back. You know, there's no shadow it creates, there's no surface. So this it makes it feel like, okay, there's something it's standing on, and I like that. So which is why I kept it. You can always, I mean, you don't have to use it. It's just depends on the kind of code or the kind of type you're working on. So this like gives me sort of like a hollow feeling, which I didn't want. That's why I added the plane at the back. I also have a plane at the bottom, which again adds a shadow below it. And just to this object over here is like sort of like a plunger that I tried to create because we're talking about hairy situations. So I thought, and I needed something in this spot to make it look more better, like as a layout in the square form. So I thought, okay, well, let's try including some sort of object and see how it looks. And yeah, plunger is what I went with, and I just put the same patterns and colors over there and tried to make it come together.
I'm glad you said that. I was totally gonna say it looks like a plunger. Totally what I thought as well. But let's take a second to talk about the rendering on this. When you render and like the hairy texture becomes really like just the lighting on it, it is so different in a rendered view than it is. And it is.
It is.
I love it.
Yes, it is. I didn't like when I did it first, I didn't know that would happen either. So when I clicked render, I was like, oh my God, like I need to do this. Like I just started with Harry actually initially. And then I was like, oh my God, this looks so good. And then I just created a whole thing
Yes.
around it.
Isn't that great when like it's a magical surprise to yourself too? Like you don't know what to
Yeah.
expect. And then that's the beauty. Like I think it's like great when you end up hitting render and then it's just like something you just had
Yeah.
no idea, but it's like one of the good things. You're like, I am going to keep doing this. And it's interesting too,
Yeah,
like you're talking
definitely.
about the backgrounds and like the planes and everything, because for the 36 days of type that you had, you decided not to use a plane. It's sort of like a flat background. So it's
Right.
definitely a good comparison to see like the two different styles of like having a clear backdrop or like making the 3D objects look like they're sitting in a room or on a table or something versus it being still like 3D, but just in like a very 2D kind of background.
Yeah, I think that when you have like different words, it's nice to have like a shadow so that you know it's sitting somewhere. But when you have shapes, you can already tell that it's in a 3D space. But when you do a word, it's like in between a 2D and 3D space. So I sort of like to have that shadow at the back. And one thing I was going to touch upon is this. So you can always add a subtle texture to the background. So I used the ceramic. Um, Let me just jump to that. On the left over here, you have the ceramic material. So that's the material I used because it gives you the option to have different sort of patterns at the back. So I chose a square, but you can always do like, let's say a diamond or let's say hexagon. So it's up to you, like whatever you think works for you. And so I went ahead and chose the square and I kept you can change the colors of the lines and the tile. So I kept the lines and the tile a similar color because I didn't want it to overpower what I have in front. So I went ahead and kept that like sort of light. And then, so I'm just going to hit the render preview just to show you how that looks. Used bright colors, patterns, texture on Harry, and yeah. So this is how it basically all came together. And it's up to you. And lighting, I think, again, based on whatever you think, wherever you want the light to come from, I can always go light or dark. Let's say if I want like a back, this is called a backlight. So I'm just going to give you a quick render of that to show you how it looks. And it really changes the vibe of the whole thing. So this you can make out that the light just comes from one side. So there are a lot of dark areas on the render. And yeah, so I didn't want that. So I wanted like the whole thing to be bright. And yeah, so basically once you're done with your whole composition, you can go to render and then select whichever you want, whatever quality you want it to be. Low, I can just repeat myself. So I mentioned earlier that low is when you just want to see, you want a quick view of how it looks. Low takes a lot lesser time to render versus medium and high. So when you're sure of what you want is when you click on either medium or high and start rendering it. So now this, because it has like multiple things, it has multiple textures and colors and materials. So it will take a bit longer to render. So once you hit the render button, I can show you what that looks like. Yeah.
You're about to hit the render. I was like, all right, I'm going to go grab a hot cocoa. I'll be back in a couple. Take a little time.
So yes, that's what it looks like once you render the whole thing. So it gives you that, like I mentioned, when you add a plane at the back, it gives you that shadow and everything. I've made sure in my dimension file, if you see you can show you a bit at the back, like you can see that everything is touching the plane. So that gives you that, that sort of makes sure that you have that black shadow at the back. If you make it come a lot too much in front, then you can clearly notice that there's like it's just bright at the back, which you will be able to see. So just wanted to give you that view at the back. So this is like your messy part of the file where you don't want anybody to see this, and then the front is what you basically want everybody to see.
Honored we're able to see the messy parts of the file. The good stuff. That's what we need to know what's going on. Yeah. But it's so true. I mean, it's cool to see also just like the output of this. And I'm curious with the lighting, like you touched on it a little bit. Like, what are your considerations? Like when you do start to play around with light or different pieces, like what are you looking for? What are you thinking about?
I usually for quotes, you want everything to be like nicely lit up, especially because I'm doing something that's colorful and fun. I wanted everything to be, all happy and nice, and so everything is bright. But let's say you want maybe it's something that needs like a darker color tone. Maybe it depends on, let's say if the coat is something that's darker, or you just want like a dark vibe as a whole, then I would choose maybe backlight or softer light, and then adjust the rotation of the light, so I can see that, okay, there's something coming from one side, and then it's dark on one side, it's lighter on the other side. So I think it depends on, because we're speaking about a code, I'm taking like this is an example. So if you want it to be something that's if it's I'm not able to think of an example of like something that I would add like a dark light to, but yeah, so I'm just saying that it depends on the vibe of the code. So if it's happy, then yeah, it's all lit up. If it's not, then I would choose something that has like a darker tone to it.
Yeah, it could be like just like a moodier quote, or just like
I wasn't able to think of a moody quote on the top of my head. But yeah.
I like that you got high energy, you're positive. It's okay, it's good. The tone didn't turn dark. Maybe hopefully not tomorrow it's like a very different tone. No, just kidding. Yeah, but plus I think the lighting was interesting on this too, when you start to, like, you've talked about matte colors or just like different colors or metallics, but like when you start to think about texture and really like beyond color, like lighting is a huge part of showing off different textures and what you start to see. So I think it's also like really important to like play around with that and dig in.
Yeah, definitely. So I can just quickly,
yes,
like, this is something I figured out, like when you put gold and you use this sort of like this sort of color, this sort of lighting, and you try rendering it, it gets really, really shiny. Like, this is like a preview render, so you probably can't see the shine like that well. But this is something you can just keep playing around with. So
yeah, it very quickly changes into, I don't know, like a nighttime disco situation.
Yeah, like a disco. Yeah, I know. Yeah. So if you add metal and you change the color and you change the lighting, it just really changes things around. So matte keeps you in that safe space where it doesn't go too crazy. But using any metal sort of texture and then changing the light, yeah, you can get like really crazy stuff from it.
Yeah, so those of you watching, I mean, definitely play around, start to like have some fun. And like, I think that your work is super playful, but then it's just like the process of all of this is also like, you can be really playful with it. Like, don't be too scared to like mess around and play with the different like materials and textures. But yeah, Anu, it would be awesome to maybe do like a summary of like what you started with today, like everything you kind of gone through and like where we've ended up.
Yeah. So that's where my Illustrator board comes to use. So here I started with, so today I started with starting with the basic Letterform for 36 days of type. So since today is A, that would be a nice idea to start with how to build A using Dimension. First, I usually start with showing what the different parts of the A are, just to know what I can play around with and what I can't. And then I started building different forms of an A. So let's say this was like the capital A that I tried out, tried using different shapes to see how far or how different I can go with it. And this was like the small, another A that I tried out just using very, very basic shapes. And this space got converted into this on Dimension. So using basic shapes, it's all in the shape section on Dimension. So where you have the drop, cylinder, and spheres. And yeah, so we did 2 renders. The one on the left is what I had done for my 36 days of type last year. And this on the right is what we played around with now. You can always play around with materials, texture, color, trying other different shapes. Everything is possible on Dimension. So keep playing around till you figure out what works for you. And next we tried a quote. So the quote is called "It's a Hairy Situation." And this font, the font over here, you can see over here, everybody can try it out. It's called Don Jose. And it gives you the flexibility to have different sort of patterns within the text. So went ahead and used that text, got a sort of like basic layout going here, and then huge jump from left to the right. But basically, this is what the final product was, using the same everything that I had spoken about earlier for the 36 days of type. So the torus is here, the cylinder, the sphere, text, and then in both cases, in 36 days of type and this, I used matte. So you can see that it's not just like using matte is not limiting at all. Like this, the letter A and this look completely different. So you can always try out, even if you don't want to mess around with materials too soon, you can just keep matte and try to figure out other things that you can play around with, and then later on jump onto material. So yeah, this is like the final product of what we created today. And yeah, used Illustrator and Dimension to create this. So that's pretty much, I think, what we covered for today. And so tomorrow I would be speaking a bit more about Dimension and creating shapes using Illustrator and then taking them onto Dimension and showing you what all more stuff you can create. So tomorrow will be more about creating shapes and versus, doing a lot of typography.
Awesome. Well, it's been so fun having you on the stream. And like Anu said, we're going to be back again tomorrow, 9:30 Pacific time, for part 2 of the 3D illustration. And then make sure that you just stick around for this week's Illustrator challenges with Claudie from Print My Soul. And then immediately following that, there's vector character art with Natasha. So some really awesome content from women all week long. But yeah, thank you so much for joining, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a great